Hey guys, now today we're going to be having a look at the much maligned, much misunderstood and generally all-round slated 64-bit powerhouse that is the Atari Jaguar. Now a little disclaimer right at the start of this video, I'm English, I'm from Britain, and the way that we pronounce not only the animal, the cat, but also the console as well is Jaguar. I know in America it's generally called the Jaguar or the Jaguar, but I thought I'd get this out of the way before the inevitable pronunciation thread kicks off in the comments like it seems to in every Jaguar video. Me being British, in this video this will be referred to as the Atari Jaguar from here on in, so obviously feel free to pronounce it however you want, but that's how I say it. So the Atari Jaguar is a very interesting console, not only because of the awful reputation that it's got these days. I mean, if you ever see any of these polls, you know, the top 5 biggest gaming disasters, the biggest technology flops, worst consoles, worst games, worst controllers, generally the Atari Jaguar will be somewhere in the top 5 of most of those lists. But is it a reputation that's really deserved? Well, to get the story of the Jaguar, we've got to go back to the beginning, and quite interestingly, the story of the Jag actually starts here in Britain, in Cambridge, at a company called Sinclair. Now, if you know anything about the British home computer scene of the 1980s, you'll be all too familiar with Sinclair, the company that were based in Cambridge, headed by Clive Sinclair and responsible for much loved home computers like the ZX81, ZX80, the ZX Spectrum, and also the C5 vehicle. Very famous entrepreneur and inventor back in the 80s was Sir Clive Sinclair, and the Spectrum line in particular was a very popular range of home computers. Now there were a team of engineers who were working at Sinclair. I think it was headed by Martin Brennan, and Martin worked on the original rubber-keyed Spectrum, and I think the Spectrum 128 was really his baby. At the time though, he saw that Sinclair were kind of going in a different direction to what he believed they should. Martin saw that the core fan base of Sinclair and the Spectrum and the ZX80 were home users who loved the machines because, you know, they were affordable, they were easy to program, and they had relatively good sound and graphics for their era. However, at the time, Clive Sinclair wanted to take the company in a different direction, and the next machine was going to be aimed at businesses. And obviously they came out with the Sinclair QL that was a colossal disaster, and that really, you know, ended up in the company going under and selling out to Alan Sugar from Amstrad. So Martin and the team set up a small company called Flare Technologies, also based in Cambridge, and the idea was that they were going to make the spiritual successor to the Spectrum. But also Martin said around that time he was fascinated by the new Commodore Amiga. So he had this idea that he was going to make a machine that was going to be very strong for graphics and audio, and he looked at the Amiga and he thought, you know, it was obviously a machine that was very powerful, but he said that there was basically everything that you did on the Amiga, there was like 3 or 4 different ways of doing it, and he believed he could make a simpler version of it that they could sell a lot cheaper, probably around the £200 mark. 200 British pounds. So Flare Technologies developed a chipset and system called the Flare 1. Now at the time, anyone that kind of kept up with gaming systems in the UK back in the late 80s might remember a system that was called the Conix multi-system, and basically Conix bought or licensed the Flare 1 chipset, and they were going to put this into a home console that could pretty much do everything. And you know, they were really at the stage where it was about to be released. There was even promotional videos made for it.
Conix multi-system. Experience the reality. Get behind the wheel of the new Conix multi-system and you'll really appreciate that powerful 32-bit custom processor. This is real state-of-the-art graphic performance, and even at these speeds, it handles beautifully.
And Conix were really more known for peripherals. I mean, I remember the Conix Speed King joystick. You know, they did a lot of joysticks and steering wheels and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I think it turned out that they either couldn't sell it for the price they wanted to, had manufacturing problems, or basically couldn't afford to get the system out at the 23rd hour. So the Conix multi-system was never to be. I think in the end, the Flare 1 chipset ended up going into stuff like fruit machines and that kind of thing. But undeterred, Martin and the team decided to work on the next chipset, which they codenamed the Flare 2, and that was to be a full 64, or even in parts I think it was 128-bit chipset. Now at the time, one of the guys who worked for Flare left and actually got a job in Sunnyvale, California, working for Atari. And at the time it was just after, you know, kind of the home computer era. of Atari was going under. The Falcon was due to be released, but really they'd taken their eye off that and decided that they wanted to compete in the gaming sphere up against Sega and Nintendo. And they were working on a 1632-bit hybrid machine called the Atari Panther. And at the time I said this, this ex-employee of Flair was working there, and he actually invited Martin over to have a look at the technology they were working on. And then they got chatting to Jack Tramiel, formerly of Commodore, who now headed Atari, and his son Sam, and basically said, in England, in Cambridge, we've actually got this Flair 2 chipset, which is, at its heart, 64-bit architecture. Why don't we sell this to you and work together? And rather than bringing out this, 16 or 32-bit console in 1991, 1992, that's probably going to be outdated. He kind of, sat down and discussed with the Tramiels and said 32-bit and 3D graphics is going to be the next big thing. We've got this 64-bit system. You can leapfrog ahead of the competition and be the first one on the block with this new technology. So they decided to scrap the Panther project, even though that was pretty far along. From what I've heard, Panther was pretty much complete. There are actually a few dev kits out there in the hands of Atari fans, and there were actually some working games at the time. I think Jeff Minter actually had a title that he developed on it, although none of these have actually surfaced in the wild, if I remember correctly. So Atari decided that they'll sack off the Panther, going to work with these guys from Britain, the Flair Technology guys, and work on the 64-bit project, which was to become known as the Atari Jaguar. Now, I've heard a story that apparently the reason they chose these cat names is because Martin actually got his wife a Panther car, and Sam and Jack Tramiel were apparently massive fans of cars, really big car enthusiasts. And the Flair guys being from Britain, they thought, let's think of a good British car manufacturer. So the name Jaguar was named as, kind of a homage to the British cars. Now, obviously at the time, the subject that kind of overshadows the Jag in today's day and age, and at the time as well, is it was right in the middle of the bit wars. At the time, you remember the 16-bit machines had come along, the Sega and Super Nintendo. Commodore had a machine out, the Amiga CD32, and really every company was trying to outdo another one by claiming that they had more bits. And really you can probably thank the Jaguar for ending the bit war, really, because there was a big argument over, is it really a 64-bit system? Now, before we get into this and have a look at why it is or why it isn't, I've actually got a little bit of footage here from the original press announcement when all of the media got together at Atari's HQ back in August of 1993. Sam Tramiel was there and some of the engineers, so let's have a little look at their explanation.
As we have been told by many different people, Trip Hawkins has been telling everybody that the Jaguar is not a 64-bit system, that it really is two 32-bit processors running in parallel. This is absolutely not a true statement. And we'll introduce Leonard Tramiel, who will tell you more about it. But if we do it Trip's way, by adding up all the different processors we have in the machine, our system is a 240-bit machine. So we have 5 processors in the product. So not 232s, but we have a total of 240 bits of processing power. It is, joking aside, it really is a 64-bit system. Go ahead over to Leonard Tramiel, who will tell you the technical details, along with Tramiel right after him. Thank you. Now come back.
As Sam pointed out, there are 5 processors in the Jaguar system, and their names and sort of typical technical contractions are here in front of you. The heart of our system is the 64-bit bus. And if we skip forward one slide, you see our system is a true 64-bit system, which gets greater than 100 megabytes per second at bus standard. We go back to the block diagram. You see that all of the processors are sitting on the 64-bit bus, and 3 of them, the object processor, the graphics processing unit, and the glitter, have direct 64-bit access to this bus, and you can access all of the memory in the system directly through the 64-bit bus, and do these transfers with a speed of in excess of 100 megabytes per second.
So that's from Atari's mouth. Now, the subject that regularly gets debated over this, is it 64-bit or 32-bit, is it's a quote that's been attributed to Trip Hawkins from 3DO, formerly of Electronic Arts, who headed up the 3DO company, who at the time were really Atari's main competitor. Both machines ended up being commercial failures. However, I think Trip was a little bit nervous, and he didn't really want Atari to take the crown on the bit wars, so I can't find any concrete evidence that he ever said this, but it is referenced all over the web. That apparently he came along and said the Atari Jaguar is just two 32-bit processors added together to make 64. Apparently Tripp said that, and then later on, America's biggest gaming magazine, EGM, also printed that in one of their columns as well. And I think, EGM was a massive magazine at the time. And, you think this is kind of pre-internet for most people. Magazines held a lot of weight back then. And there are some rumours on the forums that I've been reading that apparently EGM and Atari had a massive fallout. Because if you read the initial reviews and initial press that EGM gave the Atari Jaguar, it was all pretty positive. However, apparently when the machine was ready for launch, they'd gone to Sam and Jack Trammell saying, we want an Atari Jag for our offices, we want all the peripherals for it, we want all of the games. And Atari, if you remember anything about Commodore in the early days when Jack Trammell ran that, he was notoriously tight with his money, and he said, we'll loan you a system so you can review it, however we don't give out any machines for people to keep. If you want one, you've got to buy it like everyone else. And this pissed off EGM, and kind of was a bit of a blow to their ego. And after that, they had a massive change in attitude. And a lot of the Atari fans really think that there was a vendetta within EGM to basically destroy the Atari Jaguar. It was, they were hurt pride, they were really pissed off at Atari for kind of blanking them like this. And in the end, there was an article that really does give a bit of credence to this. They did a comparison of Doom on the Sega 32X and the Atari Jaguar, and they actually scored the 32X version much higher, despite the fact that it had much less colours, it ran in a window rather than full screen. And then it turned out later on that actually the 32X version of Doom was the Atari Jaguar source code that was just downgraded slightly so it would run on the 32X. So generally they reviewed a cut down version of the exact same source code more favourably than the full version of it. So that really proved that they did kind of have something against the Jag, so they were on a bit of a mission to destroy it, really. And being the biggest influence in gaming in America at the time, their opinions held a lot of weight. So let's have a little look inside the Jag, crack it open and see how this baby works.
Introducing Alien vs. Predator for the 64-bit Atari Jaguar. You might not want to play it alone.
Ah! Mom.
Just before we go inside it though, I thought I'd give you a quick look at the exterior of the Atari Jaguar, because I've always thought it's quite a stylish looking system. It is quite minimal. If you look at the front of it here, you've got the Atari logo there, and then on the side there's the Jaguar logo. With the 3 claw marks coming off the R. To me that always looked a bit like it was written in blood, like after a Jaguar, massacred a deer or something like that. Then it says here on the front, 64-bit interactive multimedia system. Now you've got to remember in the time frame that this came out in the early 90s, CD-ROM technology was taking off, everyone wanted to have the multimedia buzzword on their system, even though this is really, an out-and-out games machine. There's nothing really, multimedia makes you think of encyclopedias and all that, which this didn't have any titles like that at all. Then you've got a little LED here on the front that signifies whether the system has got power. Then you've got the power button above it here. Now, interestingly, you look at the top here. As you can see, there is no dust cover on the cartridge slot here, which most systems have a little cover at the top to stop dust getting in. Unfortunately, due to the way the Jag is designed, if it doesn't make a good contact when you put a cartridge in, for example, I've got Zool 2 here, which you normally just pop into there. If it doesn't make a good contact, then the system will not power on. So you'll press it and the light won't light up, and by all accounts it will appear like the system's actually dead. However, if you blow the contacts and do a bit of cleaning, then generally it will come back to life. Unfortunately, that does mean that a lot of people that have had these machines in their attic for 20 years might put a game in, try it, and assume that the console's dead and throw them in the bin, which I imagine happens quite a lot. So that was kind of an unfortunate design decision there. Then on the front of the machine, we have 2 proprietary joystick ports. These are female connectors, and I think they're actually pin compatible with VGA. So I've read of some Jaguar users actually using VGA extenders to get a bit more length out the cables. Not much on the side. You've got this kind of cool fin design here. Actually, looking at the Jaguar, it reminded me of the old Do you remember the Irwin Allen sci-fi series Land of the Giants? It always reminded me a bit of the spaceship off that, the Spindrift. There you go, probably been a bit too nerdy now. Then we look at the back of the machine here. Not really a lot on it. You've got a power connector there, an RF out there too. And then there are some people that said the Jag didn't have an RGB out or an AV out. It does actually. It's actually labelled at the top there, AV. So you can get cables for SCART and composite readily available. You know, I think a lot of third-party companies make them on eBay. I've actually got an original Atari SCART cable, which gives you a really nice picture. Much nicer than the built-in RF. And then you've got a DSP here as well that was used for external expansions. There was stuff like the Jag Link that communicated with another Atari Jaguar, you know, system link. There was a modem, I think. Not sure whether that ever got a widespread release. And also there was a virtual reality helmet that was made for it too, that was finished, although unfortunately never got released either. And looking at the top of the machine here, where the cartridge slot goes, this is where the main peripheral that was released for the Jag, the Jaguar CD, fits in. So literally that just clips in there. You press it down, and then you have a CD add-on. It's got a pass-through at the top there, so you can pop your game cartridges in. And this peripheral here was actually made by Philips. Now, I have read that there was only around 20,000 of these ever released, and even less of them really work today. I am fortunate enough to have a working Atari Jaguar CD, so I will show you a few games on it a bit later. And mine's in really good condition, actually, not a mark on the thing. You've got a little open and close button there, and then it's not spring-loaded or anything, so you've got to pull it up manually. Got your spindle and your laser in there as well. And the good thing about it is, if it does break, being a Philips unit, it is actually quite, you know, standard CD internal, so you can replace the laser and get new CD-ROM mechanisms quite readily available these days. And then to close it, you've actually got to press a button and then click it down into place. So it does feel a little bit flimsy, and of course everyone makes a comparison that it looks a bit like a toilet, which yeah, okay, admittedly it does slightly. So I mentioned that we'd have a little look inside the Jag and see what powers this beast. So I'll get my screwdriver and we'll crack it open. And I'm finally inside the Jaguar after about 15 minutes of wrestling with some pretty tight RF shielding. You've got all these tabs along the side here, and at the front there's 3 on either side, and they were twisted round, and they're really stiff as well. So yeah, Atari didn't want the end user or any unauthorized repairs going on. These are, you know, proper finger-splitting tabs on this thing. So when we get inside it though and look at the main board, actually it's a pretty tidy, compact design really. Most of the work on board is taken care of by these 3 ICs that you've got here. Now there's actually 5 processors on board contained within these 3 chips, and the way the Jag was designed is that you were meant to actually use all 5 processors in unison to get the full power out of the machine, which was actually a very unique architecture for the time. You know, generally you'd look at a system like the Super Nintendo or the Sega Mega Drive, and you look at it, you know, you'd say it's got a, you know, the Mega Drive's got a 16-bit Motorola 68K, therefore that defines it as a 16-bit machine. However, things get a bit more complex when you get a machine that's actually got 5 processors that are meant to be used in unison, and they all share this 64-bit address space. So the main work of the Jag is actually done by these 2 chips here. You've got a GPU and a sound chip, essentially. And as is customary with machines of the era from the 80s and 90s, they've given them, you know, cute nicknames. We've got the Tom and the Jerry chip. So with Tom, we've got a GPU with a 32-bit RISC architecture. There's also a 3D instruction set on there as well. There's an object processor on board, which is full 64-bit, and that is responsible for, you know, throwing the video around and basically providing all the video from the system. There's also a maths coprocessor on there, the Blitter, which is full 64-bit, and that does stuff like your depth buffering and your shading. Jerry is, architecturally, it's pretty similar to Tom. You know, they're both designed to be used together. It's also got a RISC core as well. That's a 32-bit DSP, providing 16-bit CD quality audio. And then we've got a Motorola 68K on board as well, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, is the CPU that the Mega Drive used, and also machines like the Commodore Amiga and the Atari ST. Now, there are several theories as to why the 68K is on board on this machine. Really, a lot of people say it's because programmers were already familiar with the 68K, so it would give them kind of a good starting point. However, that was also kind of one of the downfalls of the Jaguar as well. I mean, really, what it was put there for is as a, you know, like a dog's body chip, really. It was meant to do menial tasks like, you know, taking inputs from the control ports, that kind of thing. However, because of the design and the fact that they're all on this main data bus, it does mean that you could actually use that as the main CPU for the system. So that meant the programmers either who couldn't get their head around this multiprocessor architecture, or were just really lazy, and publishers would be like, oh well, we can just put an Amiga game to the Atari Jaguar, we'll use the 68K and that'll do. And then you could get, you'd end up with games that were essentially just 16-bit ports that were really simple to transfer over to the Jag. Hence why, you do get a lot of games that really do not take advantage of this multiprocessor system, and, they'll just use the 68K, and that won't look any better than the ports on the Sega Mega Drive or the Amiga, for example, which, is a bit of a tragedy, but that is, the way the system's designed. You could be lazy and take shortcuts if you wanted to. And then sharing the data bus, we've got some RAM here. It's got 2 megabytes on 512K banks. I think these are DRAMs here, just also connected to the 64-bit address space. Cartridge slot there, RF modulator, your 2 control ports, the power LED, the switches on there as well, and also got your output ports on the back and your AC there. And that's about it, really. As I mentioned, it's a pretty tidy, compact board. Most of the work's in these 2 ICs here. So what we'll do now is we'll put it all back together, and we'll get the Jag fired up, and I'll show you a few of the games.
This is the Jaguar Vr system that we've been developing. Basically, as you can see, we have a helmet design or a headset design. We have sort of 3 special parts on this system: the optical system, the tracking system, and also the acoustic system. In terms of the tracking system, we have probably the world's highest performing tracking system, even though it's a consumer unit. This unit actually performs to a higher specification than even the industrial systems that we use in our high-performance arcade systems. Added to the unit is the microprocessor over here, which calculates all the angles, etc., and manages the whole VR system. And basically, you wear the system in front here. If I could show you, this is just the very first prototype, first time we've shown the system. So it's not in any way to be assumed that this is the production quality. But if we load up the game here, what I'll demonstrate to you in this it's only about 2 months old, this game, but you'll see just how fast and real time the tracking system is. This is the first game we're doing called Missile Command, and as you can see, the unit is extremely responsive, and basically if you play the game, you can see that you can track very effectively and in real time, which is the first time this has ever been done at these sort of price points. And you see that you have a full-blown VR system here for the consumer.
So here are the Jag games that I've got so far. Now, I've only been collecting for a couple of months, but I've got around about 23 titles, a lot of loose carts, a couple of boxed games, and a few CD games as well. And considering there's only about 70 commercial titles on the Jaguar, I'm pretty much over a quarter of the way there to a complete collection. Some of them sell for a ridiculous price on eBay, though. But I thought to show you what a Jag game looks like, we'll actually do a live unboxing of this game here, Iron Soldier. Now, before anyone goes apeshit, I know there will be some comments of people going, I can't believe you unboxed it and unsealed the game. I will just say right now, I'm not really much of a game collector. I'm definitely not one of those guys that, buys sealed copies of games to never use them and put them on a shelf for all eternity. The reason I buy software and games is to use and play them. It just so happened that when I bought my Jag, it actually came with a couple of games that were still in their original seal. As you can see here, this has never been opened. It's even still got the little hook that you hang it on the shelves in the stores with. So yeah, I've got that out of the way. I've checked on eBay, even sealed a copy of Iron Soldier. It's a very, very common game for the Jag. Only goes for about 25 quid anyway. So what I thought we'd do is open this and show you what it's like basically unwrapping a brand new Jag game. Right, I've just done a really quick edit to kind of get it started here. So we'll literally just peel this away. Make sure I get it all in on camera. There we go. Smell that lovely 1994 air inside the sealed plastic there. So this game's called Iron Soldier. I'll actually show you what the game looks like in a minute. As you can see, Jag games come in these quite flimsy cardboard cases. You know, they don't feel very robust, I've got to say. Get the Jag logo on there as well, a screenshot, then you know, pretty standard screenshots and description on the back of the box there. This is Kids to Adults Animated Violence, it says. So we'll open the top of the box here. Empty in there. Then we've got a printed manual there in black and white. Let me have a little sniff. Still smells new, actually. Then yeah, it's pretty much just, you know, game instructions in various languages. We've got an official gamer's guide. Reserve your copy now. This must have been a magazine by the looks of it. Official Atari Jag magazine with cheats and stuff in. There we go. It's a guidebook. I have to make sure I send that off. What's this here? A warranty seal, is it? Yeah, a little questionnaire that used to get a lot of titles back then. And then the game itself. So still sealed in the plastic here. And we've got an overlay for the controller, which I'll show you in a moment. So we'll take this off. Bit of sellotape there. We've got the little disclaimers there, the usual stuff, you know, don't put it on your head, etc. And terms and conditions. So I'll show you that in more detail in just a moment. Here are what the Atari Jaguar carts look like. Now they've got these stickers on the front here. Then you've got a handle on the top of the cart, which I know a lot of YouTubers take the piss out of these handles, saying, you know, oh, no, not like you couldn't pick up games on like the Mega Drive or whatever. However, I actually think these are quite handy. You know, you get a good bit of grip on them. Obviously, it does mean that you can't put end labels on them, which does bother some people. On the back, you've got the Atari logo there, and then on the bottom, just the cartridge connector there. So there you go. It's a brand new copy of Iron Soldier, which I will boot up and test out in a moment. And this here is an inlay for the controller. So while we're doing this, I'll quickly show you what the Atari Jag's official controller looks like. And there was a couple of different versions of the controller. Here's what the most common one looks like. These are the ones that are actually packed in with the system. Now, this is kind of a throwback to, you know, the early days of video game systems. I think it was like the Intellivision, and that used to have these little number pads on the bottom there. A lot of people say, you know, it's like a telephone keypad. The reason that this exists here is because most games actually come with these little inlays that you can just, you know, pop in. So there's little holes in there that you can slide these into, like that. And then all of these buttons then are mapped to different functions in the game. Now, I've got to say, even though it was a way to give you more buttons than the standard, you know, 3 buttons at the top of the pad's got, it wasn't all that intuitive, because if you're in game, you're really not going to remember what all the different functions for each game does. So you spend a lot of your time looking down thinking, oh, hang on, what's this? And you're taking your eyes off the screen. So really it wasn't all that well thought out, I don't think. And generally you just kind of don't bother putting these inlays on most of the time. And they feel a bit flimsy with it over these rubber keys anyway. Otherwise though, you've got these nice big fire buttons at the top here, pause option, that's generally a start button, and a little D-pad here, which is not too bad actually. Now, I do often read a lot of criticism about this controller, people saying that it ranks up there with the worst video games controllers of all time. I generally see it on those, top 10 worst controller lists all the time. However, I've got a feeling that a lot of people that say that probably have never actually given it a proper go. And maybe just seen pictures of it and kind of believe, the hype of what everyone else says, because, holding it in your hands, it does actually feel quite a solid controller. And the D-pad's not bad at all, actually. It's quite responsive, and these, buttons are nice and big, and you can press them easy. And you have got some, little sections here. It's quite ergonomically designed, so it fits in your hand quite nicely. Personally, I don't think it's all that bad. I mean, it probably would be a little bit nicer without the bottom half on, if they could have kind of redesigned it and give you a few more buttons. Later on, there was a second controller release called the Pro controller that was a bit thinner and actually gave you 6 buttons instead of the 3 on here, but they go for an absolute fortune now, about £200 or £300, the last one I saw on eBay. So there you go, that's the standard Atari Jaguar controller. So let's get our game on and see what some of the titles look like. Now, when you first insert a game into the Jag, you get this little sound effect, which hardcore Atari fans might recognise from the old TV adverts back in the 80s. Right, the first game I'm going to demo is a cartridge game called Super Burnout. It is really a Super Hang-On clone, although I think definitely one of my favourite titles on the Jag. And as you can see, just from getting started on the game here, we've got some, impressive music. The sound effects are pretty good, and also the thing I like about this game is it is, essentially a 2D racer. Although you can see how superior this looks to similar titles on like the Mega Drive or the Super Nintendo. The sprites are a lot bigger. The system's throwing them around the screen with no problem at all. You've got some nice examples of the Jaguar sprite scaling there on those trees, and also we've got some nighttime levels here too. And I love the sense of speed that you get in this game as well. As you can watch here when we go through this checkpoint, watch how fast you take the corners. It's quite an exhilarating game. You really get, a good sense of speed, and it is an overall really good racing game actually. Definitely one of my favourites on the Jag.
Best time, final lap.
And the next game we'll take a look at is actually one of the most famous Atari Jaguar games, Tempest 2000 by the legendary Jeff Minter of Llamasoft. And it is of course a remake or kind of updated version of the arcade favourite from back in the early 80s. And it had a proper kick-ass soundtrack. In fact, the soundtrack on this was so good, it actually got an audio CD release as well in about 1995. And this game got ported to a few different platforms, including the Sega Saturn, which was a pretty faithful port actually. It had that had proper CD music as opposed to being generated by the computer. And also these kind of pixel shatter effects that you see. The Saturn did a pretty good job of replicating those. It also got a port to the PlayStation 1. I think it was called Tempest X on that, although it kind of missed a lot of these kind of pixel explosion effects and all that, and it was a lot more like polygon based, and I don't think anywhere near as good. The original version though is on the Atari Jaguar, and I think it is probably my favourite version. And this next game is really an essential addition to any Jaguar collector's game library. This one's called Iron Soldier, another one of these standout titles on the Jag, in my opinion. It's as you can see from looking at this here, a first-person mech-style game. Developed by a company called Eclipse Software and released in 1994. Now, you basically control this massive 42-foot or 13-metre robot, and your aim is to go around just destroying, blowing up pretty much everything on screen, whether that be, enemies in tanks or helicopters. Later on in the game, there's like other robots that you got to face, and you can blow buildings up as well. And as you can see, for a system that promised 64 bits of power, it does have some really nice polygon graphics. The controls, some people think are a little bit complex, but to be honest, if you read the manual and have a little play around, you'll master them in like 5 minutes. It won't take very long. And this also got a sequel on the Atari Jaguar CD that I'll show you here, with some even more impressive graphics actually. So yeah, definitely recommend it. Iron Soldier 1 and 2, and I think a third game did come out and it was only on the PlayStation though. Now this next game admittedly doesn't really showcase the 64-bit power of the Atari Jaguar all that well. However, if you like 2D vertical scrolling shoot-em-ups, you will love this one. It's called Raiden. It was an arcade game back in around 1990, and obviously they were particularly big in Japan. And it was ported to loads of systems that were big out there, like the FM Towns Marty, the PC Engine, and I think there was also an Amiga version planned that I think I read got to prototype stage but may have never been properly released. I think it also got released on the PlayStation Network recently too. So like I said, it's essentially, a 2D vertical scrolling shoot 'em up, and a pretty good one at that actually. The graphics look a little bit dated for the era that it came out. It is very much a late 80s kind of arcade game at heart, but it's got a proper kick-ass arcade soundtrack. It's very, very playable. It's pretty intense. It's pretty fast moving, and yeah, I'm a big fan of this game actually. Definitely in terms of playability, especially in two-player mode, that I think is quite rare on ports of this. The Atari Jaguar version, unfortunately I haven't got a friend with a second controller here at the moment, but you can actually play this in 2 players. So yeah, if you've got a Jag, you can get this one pretty cheap. I actually got my copy for about £10. Now this next title is probably the most high-profile game on the Atari Jaguar, definitely the game that most people seem to talk about these days, apart from the really bad ones. And some people actually call this a system seller. I've seen people who actually go out and buy a Jag just to play this game. Now, we're looking at Alien vs Predator here. Now obviously there have been many different video games in both of those franchises over the years. This particular title, though, is an Atari Jaguar exclusive, and it was really the biggest first-person shooter on the platform, and really did showcase the system's power really well, I think. If you look at these graphics, for example, there were those naysayers back then who said the Jag's no more powerful than the Sega Mega Drive. You look at graphics like this and the kind of the 3D modelling and everything, you know, a Sega Mega Drive could not handle this kind of frame rate and these kind of graphics. And it is often praised for having some really good atmosphere in this game, because you get these long sections where you're walking along and you hear that kind of low rumbling sound effect and nothing seems to happen for a while, and then all of a sudden you'll open a door and things will go wild and you know, aliens will start running at you from all different directions. There you go. And they do take some shooting actually. And even when you walk through their blood, you get stung by it as well. And you can play in 3 different modes, either as an alien, predator, or the marine. I personally prefer playing as the marine because you get this this gun, and it does feel a bit more powerful playing as a marine than the aliens. But this is really a game you can sit down with and play for a good couple of hours. It's, you know, quite an in-depth game. The atmosphere, as I mentioned, is really good, and I think it deserves its reputation, really. A lot of people claim it is the best game on the platform, and if you've got an Atari Jaguar, this game is really an essential addition to your collection. And while we're on the subject of first-person shooters, I thought it would be a good time to show the conversions to the Atari Jaguar of the most famous FPS of all time, Doom, which is pretty much as close to the PC version as I've seen on a console. I know the version on the 3DO is pretty decent as well. The obvious omission to this everyone talks about is the fact that it's got no music for some reason, which is a bit bizarre, because as you'll see in a moment when I show you Wolfenstein 3D, the system can blatantly support it. However, it is a very faithful port of Doom. And on the subject of Wolfenstein 3D, again, I think, this is probably my favourite console version of this game. Really good. Either be, torn between this and the 3DO, but yeah, definitely worth picking up. Now, I did mention before that the Atari Jaguar has got a Motorola 68K CPU on board as well, which obviously is the CPU in the Amiga 500 and the Sega Mega Drive, and that did mean a lot of developers did get a bit lazy and basically just do straight ports of games from other 68K platforms without utilising the extra processors in the Jag. For example, we're looking at Zool 2 here, which was a pretty hyped platformer on the Amiga, particularly the original version back then. It was often kind of cited as Sonic for the Amiga, although it never really was quite to that standard, but it was a pretty good game, although the Jaguar game really is indistinguishable from the Amiga 1200 version, really. It's a fun game, but yeah, it doesn't really showcase the power of the system at all. Similar with Cannon Fodder, again, it's very similar to the Amiga version and the 3DO. Not really much extra horsepower from the Jag utilised in this game at all. You got a few extra colours here and there, but it is essentially Cannon Fodder. And the same with one of my all-time favourite games, Pinball Fantasies. We've got a few more colours than you've got in the OCS original Amiga version, but you know, again, it doesn't really showcase all that much more improvement over a 16-bit version of this game. In fact, if anything, I kind of get the impression that this runs a little bit slower than the Amiga version. Certainly doesn't feel as smooth for some reason. Again, you know, it is one of my favourite games of all time, but it would not be my preferred platform to play this game on. And again, here's another game that probably doesn't need all that much introduction. It is one of the more famous Atari Jaguar games. In recent years, probably because of the Angry Video Game Nerd episode that came out a few years ago about the Atari Jaguar. This is called Cybermorph, and as you can see by looking at it, it is a free-roaming 3D shooter game. And this was one of the launch titles for the Atari Jaguar. This was actually featured as a pack-in for the original bundle that came out in late 1993. Now, if rumours are to be believed, this game was originally developed for the cancelled Atari Panther system that was the predecessor to the Jaguar that we spoke about a bit earlier. And when the Panther was cancelled, they basically ported this over to the Jag, hence why the graphics might not be quite as impressive as they should be. Although I've got to say, you know, it's quite a fun game to sit down and play for 20 minutes or so. It's really not as bad as everyone makes out. And I think most people have watched that AVGN episode and kind of made their mind up. The most famous part of the game that everyone knows is this bit here.
Where did you learn to fly?
And I've got to say, unless you intentionally played this game really badly and fly into walls every 2 seconds on purpose, you do not see the green head anywhere near as much as James Rolfe makes out in his video. And there was actually a re-release of this game only a few years ago in 2008 for the Atari Jaguar CD that included some kind of rare behind-the-scenes footage of the producers and interviews with the art team. There were only over 10 copies of that made, so obviously that is very rare. But you know, Cybermorph is a title that pretty much every Atari Jaguar owner's got. It is probably the most common title on the system. And you know, it's a good little sit-down and play game for a few minutes. And just before we wrap up this video, I'm going to quickly demo a couple of the Jag Cd Add-On features. Now, if you watched that little presentation with Sam Trammell, the original press conference back in August 93, you may have noticed that the Jaguar CD unit was actually plugged into the console that he had on the desk in front of him. So that means, you know, it was pretty much ready in 1993, but for some reason it took Atari over 2 years to get this out commercially. It didn't come out until right at the end of the console's life in 1995. Now, if you look at this unit here, it's actually got a double-speed CD-ROM drive, and it uses a custom CD-ROM format based on the audio CD standard that holds 790 megabytes of data, so you get more than you would a standard data CD of the time. Now, there were only 11 titles ever released for the Jaguar CD commercially, though it has been really useful for homebrew developers, and there are at least about 38 to 40 titles that have been released by homebrew and indie developers on the Jag CD. Now, if you power on your Jaguar with the CD add-on connected, you get this kind of colourful, funky-looking boot screen, and it's actually got quite a neat little built-in feature if you insert an audio CD, as, you know, like pretty much every CD add-on and machine of the time, it can play audio CDs just fine. But the Jag CD has actually got the virtual light machine built in. Now, this is a little bit of code that was written by Jeff Minter, who was a guy behind Tempest 2000 I demoed before, the infamous Llama Soft, very popular on the Atari and Commodore scenes back in the old school days. And when you put an audio CD in, it kind of gives you this colour and visual effects light show that goes in time to the music. You know, it's kind of similar to what you saw in stuff like Windows Media Player years after, but it was a pretty innovative feature for the time. Obviously, by the time the Jaguar CD came out in 1995, we were well into the full motion video craze, the era when all games had to have, like, you know, full movie-based titles or animations. And the Jag CD is no exception. It actually enables Cinepack video decompression on the Jag, and you can stream that direct from CD. And I've got to say, the quality is really, really impressive for the technology of the time. I'd actually say this is up there with VHS quality. Now, this game is called Highlander. It was based on the animated series of the mid-90s, and they actually take a few clips from the cartoon version of the show and basically just dump them to CD. But, you know, watching this, it is as good as watching a VHS tape.
7 centuries have passed since the Earth plunged into darkness. 7 centuries since the Jetator swore to regain for man his lost knowledge and freedom. All the immortals took the oath, all except one who dominates the world. But soon an immortal will come to confront him. His name is Quentin MacLeod. He is the Highlander.
And while I've got this game Highlander loaded up now, I must admit I wasn't really familiar with the animated series when I was a kid. However, this game is really not all that bad, actually. I've seen some scathing reviews of this. I think the main problem with it is that the controls are a little bit clunky, and it kind of uses that tank control mechanism like other games did at the time, you know, like Alone in the Dark and the original Resident Evil game. So basically you get this character here, Quentin McLeod his name is, and you move through like some pre-rendered 3D environments. The camera angles can be a little bit all over the place. They'll kind of just swap around at very random and very awkward moments. However, it is quite an atmospheric game, and I think, you know, maybe as a graphical demo, it does kind of show you what the Jag was capable of, especially all those haters who said it didn't really have any improvement over the 16-bit consoles. And just to finish off this extremely long video, I thought I'd just quickly touch on the homebrew scene. I did mention before that the Atari Jaguar CD unit only had 11 titles commercially, but there have been about 40 odd that have come out since. Cartridge-based titles, there are only about 70 that came out during the Jaguar's commercial life, but if you take into account all the homebrew games and indie developments that have come out in the last couple of decades, you can double that number to around, about 150 odd. In fact, this footage that you're looking at here is a brand new game, a port of the classic Another World that has just been released on the Atari Jaguar. Now, this project has been authorised and supported by Eric Chahi, who was the original author of the game back in 1991, who it turns out was actually quite a big fan of the Jag, and he never got round to, being able to release his game on there. So he's got together with a company called Removers and the Retro Gaming Connection, who have actually released this. They're taking pre-orders now. Fully boxed, printed up to professional quality, a port of Another World for the Atari Jaguar that utilises all of the advanced processors in the system. And as you can see graphically, it's pretty much on par with the 3DO release, a lot nicer than the 16-bit versions of the game. And it is quite ironic really that for a system that was considered a commercial failure by all accounts, it has been really embraced by the homebrew scene in the last couple of decades, and there has been some really good titles that have come out in the last, 20 years on this system. So there is still life in the old girl yet. So hopefully this video has cleared up a little bit of confusion and a bit of the myth surrounding the Atari Jaguar. It is a really misunderstood and confused system. No one really seems to know much about it, so hopefully it's opened your eyes a little bit. Of course, if you've got any questions, leave them in the video comments box, and I will catch you in the next vid.